He's got things like Venezuela on his agenda, very much on his agenda. Slightly off the agenda, but should be on it, is Gaza and the war going on there. There are geopolitical things which are beginning to matters which are beginning to play into his agenda, although he is not recognizing it in public, namely the Red Sea choke point, Russia moving in there, the contest over the ports there, and the dire state condition of hydrocarbon maritime traffic, which is going to become a big issue. I think he's easily distracted. I think, like all old men, speaking as one, he finds it difficult to, as they said of Gerald Ford, to do a lot of things at once, walk and chew gum.
Nothing's going on at the moment, or lots is going on at the moment. March, and I've stolen this from another good friend of the show, George Barros. March 2025, Putin rejected a 30-day ceasefire agreed to by Ukraine and the United States. May 25, Putin rejects a 30-day ceasefire. July 25, Russia rejects Trump's 50-day deadline for ceasefire. December 25, we're in it now. Russia rejects or postpones or does something to US peace plan. How many more times do you think that Trump will let Putin do this?
I think Trump is quite distracted at the moment, and you look at the latest feeds from his meetings and cabinet meeting. I mean, he's struggled at times to stay awake. He's got things like Venezuela on his agenda, very much on his agenda. Slightly off the agenda, but should be on it, is Gaza and the war going on there. There are geopolitical things which are beginning to matters which are beginning to play into his agenda, although he is not recognizing it in public, namely the Red Sea choke point, Russia moving in there, the contest over the ports there, and the dire state condition of hydrocarbon maritime traffic, which is going to become a big issue. I think he's easily distracted. I think, like all old men, speaking as one, he finds it difficult to, as they said of Gerald Ford, to do a lot of things at once, walk and chew gum. I think he's made a mistake immediately as we speak, talking of the talks in Moscow. He sent in the real estate boys. The real estate boys, by that I mean Vidkov and his son-in-law Kushner. They ain't delivering.
Yeah, well, they didn't deliver beforehand, apart from Russia's 28-point demand plan that they said was an American plan. And Witkoff has decided not to go and brief Zelensky, as seemed to have been agreed before he went off to Moscow. What do you make of that? And what do you make of the dynamics between Witkoff and Marco Rubio, who seem to dig the US administration out of the mire that was created when Witkoff brought this Russian 28-point plan and you presented it as the US plan?
Sorry, I'm in frivolous, cynical mode in my talk, but it is profound. Rubio, I think, is going to dig them into a lot of problem in Venezuela, in which he is deeply committed, of course, being given his background and his community. So Rubio was the one who told us all that we know: the emperor has no clothes. That the plan, the 28 plan, was a version, and I emphasize it was a version of what Lavrov, the foreign minister, who's now been elbowed aside temporarily, or at least elbowed aside from the TV cameras by the real estate boys. But Lavrov gave this plan, and it was really, we want a ceasefire, but really we want Ukraine just to exist, don't exist altogether, but to exist as a cipher. Virtual neutrality, reduce the arms, no presence of NATO, who monitors the ceasefire, and so it goes on. And we've had a lot of rhetoric from Putin only over the last week about how we're really winning, we're getting big strategic victories at Pokrovsk. There is no satellite confirmation of that, by the way. They're in Pokrovsk, but to no strategic effect. That seems to be the thing at the moment. So there's a lot of shouting and carrying on, and we're going to win, and we're going to prosecute the war. Now let's start from that position, because there are ominous things going on. And if you'll give me the space, I'll try and make, which you should never do in a broadcast, by the way, I'll give you a list of the immediate thing, and in no particular order, is the late great Sir Michael Quinlan, one of the last great um, defence permanent undersecretaries, would say, no, first of all, let's start off with the Black Sea, the tankers, and the oil. This is very serious. Ukraine has virtually knocked Russia out of the Black Sea for maritime commerce, particularly, though. I think grain could probably slip in and out, but oil and hydrocarbons. The sign of that was that they've sunk, by my reckoning, or suddenly disappearing, in inverted commas, 5 tankers of the Shadow Fleet in the past 5 days. They've knocked out the two ports there, to the extent that we have Kazakhstan having to close the CPC, its company, the Caspian Petroleum Company's facility, its pipeline. It's down. That's reckoned to be 1% of the total global output in hydrocarbon and oil. It's huge. And Kazakhstan is desperate, and it wants to sue Ukraine. Chance would be a fine thing. I have to go on with this point 1 because it shows you where the war is going to go next, I suspect. It leaves Russia with only 1 warm water port all the year round, free of ice, to get its commerce, maritime commerce, at least from the western part of the country, out. And that is Kaliningrad. And where is Kaliningrad? Kaliningrad is a hostage enclave because it relies on the Suwalki corridor for land contact, and that has to go between Lithuania and, correction, of course, and Poland and into Belarus. You see how vulnerable it is.
And it's part of the NATO Sea, or the Baltic Sea.
Yeah, and it also means that the commercial ports, which have not been doing too well around Petersburg, are vulnerable. That is going to be the next phase of the war. Now, I want to go back to the 28-point plan, because why I said it isn't quite what Russia was demanding, as appeared at first in the Istanbul talks, rambling talks that seemed to be on off in April 22. I go back there, which Lavrov, as foreign minister, reproduced in the Alaska summit on the 15th. That is why it founded, because the Lavrov, that is the foreign ministry team, produced the talking points from Istanbul. It was in the press pack, apparently, in English translation, if you could find it. This is according to Foreign Policy magazine. And it was saying, we want this and that. Now, why am I saying that the 28-point is, and I'm not being pedantic here, why it was different, it was his emphasis on deals, hydrocarbons, paying America, JVs, and Boulder's brass standing there, and particularly when you get somebody like Dmitriev involved with Vitkov, let's go exploit the Arctic together. As one of the 28 points is exploiting the Arctic together. And so it is a real estate ripoff. No, I shouldn't have said ripoff, but it really is. Now that leads to my point 3, if I can do it. What was so conspicuous about the body language and the play out from the 28 points was America negotiating and being the arbitrator, and with Donald J. Trump possibly being the chair, the president of a peace board. And he was arbitrating between Russia, not necessarily Ukraine so much as he was arbitrating against European NATO. So there you have the leading ally in NATO, and this is the crisis now. It is one of the biggest crises in the whole history of NATO, if not the biggest. You have the lead player saying, I'm not really part of it. And this is where they are ganging up, and I think that that's what's happened in the talks, where you don't have people like Lavrov or Medvedev or necessarily people like Boroshnik, the head of the FSB and of the security services. What you have is you have the money man, the new generations. You have Ushakov, who's always been around, Ushakov, the foreign affairs advisor, Hardman, and Dmitriev, against Kushner and Vitkov. This is a very odd way to do diplomacy because they're not necessarily professional diplomats, almost any of them, with the exception of Ushakov. But certainly Dmitriev isn't. I mean, he's he's a carpetbagger who's partly Ukrainian, partly Russian, who's happens to have taken a few classes at Stanford and Harvard. So what I'm saying is that what is so conspicuous with the talks in Moscow, both before and after the event, is the hostility and fear, I would say, on the part of the Kremlin of Europe. Because what they are frightened of, and I think this is really pertinent to this whole conversation, is that Europe, in its sort of, will get the best solution last after we've exhausted all the other really bad ones, will get its act together, will arm, will confront NATO, and unless the sanctions are lifted, and unless the crisis in infrastructure, but above all energy, can be relieved, by this time next year, it could be such a crisis that Putin will be gone, which is a big thing to be made. So it is crisis and crunch. I think the weak point is Zelensky and Ukraine is in a terrible position. Of course, it's not only the scandal; they're exhausted. They're talking about let's give up. They're punch drunk on the front lines. And that is the weakness, and it's holding the line. Why they have to hold the line? Because it's no longer just about Ukraine. And I think that this is where the European governments, the Biden administration, can be held to account, because it is a confrontation between NATO Europe and NATO, which Putin always wanted it to be, and Russia now. And the cat's paw, the casus belli, the occasion, as it were, is Ukraine. And it may not be Ukraine for much longer. It could be the Baltics. It could even be the Balkans.
You've been watching Frontline with me, Philip Ingram. If you'd like access to exclusive content, please subscribe to Times Radio membership and watch us on YouTube. But you can now get us as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. And don't forget, you can also listen to Times Radio for the latest updates on global affairs and read about them at thetimes.com. Thank you.